Hey guys, welcome to Code and Counsel, another series in all things legal tech, AI, and every other domain. So today we've had a very eminent founding team. Wish to welcome Rathinamurthy and also Ajay, who are the founding team at Crio. Crio is an excellent place and for training engineers as well. And as a company, we've also interacted with Crio. And very recently, the team sold Crio, and now they're exploring the next set of opportunities. So when they have time for all of these things as well, so I thought I'll request Ajay and Ratna to come and talk to our viewers as well. So welcome on board, both of you.
Hey, thanks. Thank you. Happy to be here.
So basically, just asking. So how did Crio start? Correct. I mean, how did Crio come about? And just talk us through your journey of how you did all of these things as well.
I think I was with Flipkart before starting Crio, right? So I think being part of the Flipkart journey, I think from 2011, I think going through the peak of kind of scaling Flipkart and kind of solving some hard problems. I think that kind of personally gave me the confidence that I think building a company is definitely an exciting option, right? I think wanting to do a startup and probably have a larger impact was the first thing. Then I had a friend, Sridhar, right? I think Sridhar and Ajay were classmates in USC, right? So he moved back to India at the time. He was also exploring opportunities. Then we kind of got together. I think one common space where I think both of us were keen to spend time was education. I think that's how it started. And we started doing some early experiments, and we found even though there's a lot of opportunities for people to learn, and how people learn has not fundamentally changed.
Correct.
Right? So I think one of the initial thought, and I think it's kind of stuck with us at Crio was, how can people can people learn the way they learn at work? Right? I think a lot of us actually graduated, joined the first job, first internship. I think that's where we had a lot of learning, right?
Correct.
And probably we were fortunate to have a good company, a good manager where we had an opportunity to learn, but not everyone gets it, right? I think the fundamental thesis behind Crio was, can we actually create a place where someone can learn the way they learn at work,
Correct.
right? I think learn by doing, and kind of what we call experiential learning was kind of the starting point. Then we kind of got some of the friends together. I think Ajay joined us, right? A couple of more people joined as a founding team. I think that's when we started in 2018. I think 19 beginning is when we started operations. Yeah.
I think that's, but also after that, so much has changed, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of like how learning is now more application focused, is how we feel as well. So one of the things that even at Coco that comes up, customers will come and say, "Can you teach us how to do some of these things?" Otherwise, the flip side of this, you'll get too many support requests.
Yeah.
You will get you'll have to do knowledge bases and videos and things like that. So one of the things that is also fundamentally changed is also how people want to learn. What are the different things that they can use from an application standpoint, application usage standpoint, and things like that. I think that still hasn't sort of like really caught up. But at enterprises, this is one of the other things that is that I have seen in the sense that earlier you could go to places like Crio, Udemy, learn a few languages, get trained in some of these things as well. Now, if you go to enterprise learning, it's more about how can I do this from a sustainability point of view, from an ESG standpoint, and so on. So some changes that are happening there as well. But what you guys did is pretty phenomenal as well. And over Ajay has got even more a stellar career as well, for all of these things.
I wouldn't say that, but good opportunities, right place at the right time. I think I finished my master's in the US and got an opportunity to work at a startup called Unpacks Systems, which did a lot of email and web security and compliance related access control in enterprises. was part of their data analytics team back when doing machine learning, when machine learning was not that cool. That is 2008 is what I'm talking about, right? So that company did well. It was acquired by Cisco. Got to see how the data space was evolving so rapidly, and how machine learning would actually make an impact. Like spam filtering was new back then. People used to get a lot of spam if you had an email account back in 2008.
Some guy who came up with a razor, anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
It's a Bayesian spam filter.
Yeah.
I think Paul Graham also wrote some of those initial spam filtering algorithms.
Vipul's razor. He was quite active on something in something called CIX in Bangalore a long time back.
Okay.
And he was one of those. I remember that he had written something which impacted something like this. But sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No problem. So I was there for a few years. Got to explore other opportunities within Cisco, go to their data centers and other things. Then found a new opportunity. I joined a startup called Nest, which was doing home automation, like intelligent home products. Started by ex-Apple people, again, extremely good experience there. Hardware, we were building our own hardware and software to go with it. So hardware, software services all under the same roof, very much like the Apple culture. In fact, 90% of the company was ex-Apple. So that was also very good. And Nest was acquired by Google. And I got to see how startup, how do they go about building their products? How do you scale to the first n number of users, and from there, how do you go larger? That was a very, very good experience. And then going through an acquisition, and what happens post-acquisition, because I was at Google for about 4 to 5 years after the acquisition as well. So got a really good idea about this. Decided to come back to India after that, before the kids grew up. And that's when, Sridhar, my classmate from Masters, he was calling me, and every time I visited India, I would meet with him, and he'd say, he'd come a few years before me, and he was evaluating startups in Bangalore. He had many prototypes and many small experiments he had run, and he had run many experiments for Crio, what eventually became Crio, right? Going to a college, running some coding camps there to see how we can actually teach these college graduates how to pick up coding in a more project-based way. Give them a project. In the course of building the project, can we teach them how to do coding, even if they didn't know much at the start? So looked at the early platform implementations of Crio as well, shared a lot of ideas. But then eventually said, okay, fine, this is very interesting. Let's get together and start. So that's when I joined Crio as part of the founding team.
So, Rathina, it wouldn't be wrong to say that if you get Ajay in your team, he's been through 3 acquisitions now. 100%.
Looks like you see the thought.
So 100% acquisition.
Yeah.
So something like this. So he's got so that's where the stellar record comes in, for all of these things.
Right. I call it luck. But anyway.
I think very few people have actually gone through. I can't think of anyone other than Ajay who's actually been through 3 acquisitions. Things like this. Maybe in the US, and maybe 1 or 2 founders who've been through something like this, but notable companies as well. So, but also, it's interesting that you mentioned this. The way things have evolved or are evolving, even with the next generation coming to the workforce and things like that. These guys have already been trained on application programming. They might know a few languages as well. Nowadays, if you are in ICSE or some of those, you start from standard 7, correct, on Python programming, and before that on something else. I remember we were trained on BASIC, and basically how to start the machine and shut it down, correct? I mean, apart from a few other things, maybe a little. But that was nothing compared to what the kids are as well. So I think in the next couple of years, if you ask me, and also with the advent of AI, correct, and the way that it is used, the way applications are designed, how products come into the market, how companies are built, are fundamentally going to change as well, right? And these are some of the things that you've been thinking about, as well. So, what do you think, Ratna? Do you think this will change? How will products get built? How will AI impact some of these things? You've built companies. You've also been with companies, so you've seen the journey as well, right? So, how do you think in the next, I would say, 4 to 5 years? I think even that is a stretch sometimes.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think we have been dabbling with AI, right? So expert. But I think what I could sense is I could definitely sense a huge paradigm shift in the way software is getting built, right? I think with all the foundational LLMs and with kind of fine tuning is available on top of it for every domain, I think the way the software building is going to happen is definitely going to get reimagined, right? So I think suddenly you have a machine which has the world knowledge, right? And you can instruct the machine, you can train the machine, right? I think that make it so much powerful for the builders to build much intelligent software, right? I think otherwise I think if you just look at the software like pre-AI era, right? I think till so far, it's mostly you have a database, you have interfaces, you can store, you can compute, you can just probably present the data. And I think there's nothing, and probably a little bit of here and there machine learning models, mostly leverage in like domains like advertising, probably in search. It's very limited application, right? I think the way I see is, I think probably next few years, I think a lot of applications will be definitely reimagined, right? I think the way to think about solving a problem itself is, I see it's fundamentally changing, right? So suddenly you have a lot of power, right? I think suddenly the interactions can be multimodal, right? People can talk and machine can understand, and it's other way around as well, right? So I think suddenly the interfaces are changing, and you have, I think, the models which are so powerful, which can process, which can actually create stuff, right? So I think what was possible with software versus what is going to be possible is fundamentally changing, right? I think I see a possibility of a lot of applications getting reimagined, and we getting access to so much powerful applications, right, from consumer applications across the enterprise, right? So I think that's why I see this evolving. Probably it's a matter of probably a few more years. I think consumer application. I think you would have seen Apple's WTC demo yesterday. Right? I think now they just started putting it in all the Apple devices, right? I think it can get as common as that, right? So it comes with every device. I think they're putting on-device AI capabilities where it gets into a lot of your personal data. It's personalizing for you, right? So I think it's going to be very commonly adopted. Yeah,
I think that and this podcast for viewers is being recorded in June of 2024, and there's been a recent Apple WWDC event. Which showcased a lot of AI integrations into Apple and with a focus on privacy. Right? I think Ajay, this is you've been at Nest, so some of the privacy issues that come up when you use AI and automation technologies in the consumer space as well. And Apple also made quite a few noises around
how they safeguarding privacy. Yeah.
How they are safeguarding privacy, and if it basically is going to ping their own LLM. If it doesn't, then it's going to
go to private cloud
and figure out some of this is there, and then do a call to ChatGPT to see if there's an answer for all of these
third
things.
layer. Yeah.
Ideally, I'm sure that computing will reach a stage where it's on-device. On-device LLMs are going to become much more easier to use, and you can load any LLM that you want, essentially, correct, at that point in time. But I think from a privacy standpoint, and if you look at AI and how it's impacting different things, how do you, what are your thoughts around this?
See, there's two aspects. One, there's regulation, and then there's privacy, and we have to separate that, right? When it comes to privacy, if people see good value from sharing their private information, if it's making a market difference in the way they experience software or the value that they can get out of the software, they're more willing to give up some private information, right? For example, with Nest, we knew when people were entering their houses because the thermostats that we were selling, and heating and cooling is very expensive. It can become very expensive if your heater is running all day or AC is running all day, it becomes very expensive to run. If you don't run it at all, then coming into the house, the house is uncomfortable. It's very cold or extremely hot, and so the Nest thermostat knew when exactly you entered a house. Now that can be extremely private information.
Correct.
Right? That's very private information. Now you could also have Nest devices in your bedrooms, in your like corridors or passages in the house. So depending on whether you were in a particular room, we could think of localizing the heating or cooling to a specific area of the house. So with this data, you know where in the house a person actually is. But people are willing to give up this information to Nest because they see a tremendous value in what is coming up. I think similar things will play out with the AI wave as well. If you can show really good value and you clearly state this is the information, this is your private information I need in order to deliver this value to you, then it's a question of informed consent.
Correct.
So informed consent is fine as long as people know exactly what they're signing up for, what they're giving up, what data they're giving up in exchange for a certain tangible value to their own lives, then I think it is fine. Regulation is different, but that is something you're an expert at.
So I think especially I face this, especially because we have products at Coco that use extensive AI. Which uses AI extensively. To ensure accuracy and compliance and things like that. There are two ways to look at this, correct? We are not, Coco is, for instance, we are not always building consumer-facing product. And what happens there is, people will ask, saying, how does this impact you? It actually doesn't impact them, Sometimes if you do a direct version of ChatGPT, you enter the name of the company, and you start, as an example, you will be drafting an agreement, right? You'll say, this agreement is entered into between so and so company. You give out the name of the company with its registered office. Today, if you use some of the latest models, it'll, because the data which is already there in the LLM, it'll automatically fill out the address. Okay. People think, how did it know about all of these things? It is available publicly.
The Google Maps.
So people don't realize, they think it's an invasion of privacy. So if you ask me, even if you look at the trajectory of like consumer apps that are there on, say, Google Play Store, or even say for ChatGPT, correct, that particular application. The others are more in terms of it's like it's a solution looking for a customer rather than the other way around, correct. But if you look at like the enterprise space, correct, there are so many, you're dealing with millions of contracts, thousands of people working, people coming in, people leaving the company, people joining in. So there are quite a few things. It's an ecosystem of its own, where some of these things can be custom deployed, and it's much more appreciated because these corporations tend to be gargantuan in size. Correct? It's not necessarily that it's so. You would think that even Gen AI, or for that matter, the upcoming Gen AI, and even the current versions of what's available are more probably suited, in the enterprise space and in the consumer space. Even if you look at Apple, correct, it's like summarize this document. Now, how many times have we asked in daily life, to summarize an email?
I think pretty early days. It's
pretty
pulling
early
out something to figure out what works.
So it's like a solution looking for a problem, correct, rather than the other way around. So that's how. But the important part is on privacy. So I would think that the privacy debate is misplaced to a large extent because of what we just discussed as well. Yes, there are privacy concerns, but if you're looking at say an in-house sort of like a deployment, where you really need the data. Imagine you're a company with, say, 500 subsidiaries.
Mm-hmm.
You want a line item on some manual report, from 2006. Now go and first find the report, open it, get the approvals to get it, to do all of this. It's not possible. It's a couple of days in an enterprise, right? But you really ask something which is programmed and to give accurate results, you'll be able to get something out. This is an example where an enterprise at a level gives up some amount of its data, but it's running internally as well. And as long as even people need to realize that when they're working in corporations, it's the corporation's privacy that we should be concerned about, correct? Not necessarily like an individual privacy. I feel that sometimes in the AI debate, these two things get intermixed, and people don't have a complete idea about how some of these things actually run and pan out and things like that. But you also, just moving on to the next sort of topic on this related, I think as we run companies, we've also found that certain functional areas, say, and we discussed about this as well, say maybe legal or finance or tax for that matter, if you're doing, and these become very complex very, very soon, correct? And it's not necessarily given that every company has the best advice possible, right? It may also not be the case where a lawyer runs a company where he might have some answers on legal and compliance, or maybe a chartered accountant runs a company where he may have the domain knowledge and accounting. But overall, if you look at the ecosystem, it's not just limited to India as well. As you expand globally, you will find a myriad set of actors, correct? I was in Australia recently, where all the accounting firms are led by Indians. So I'm like, okay, I know where the baseline sits, right? So sorry, but that's how. But we've all faced some set of issues. Will not be able to get sort of like homogenized responses. The quality varies. The persons that you're interacting with, are not long-term players, correct? And then they may not be, earlier you would have firms that would actually be the repositories of institutional history.
Institutional knowledge and institutional context generally get missed.
Right? Now, but in the age of AI, some of these things can be overcome, correct? So, because it's no longer a case. And how would you feel like if I offered you a legal stack, correct, that did end to end for you, correct, and would wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and you could work on it and would not sort of like complain, and where you'd be able to do so many things with it, correct, right, from drafting, go through workflows, whatever the case may be, correct. Some of these things did not exist or existed in bits and pieces earlier. What is your thought as a founder, correct, saying, would these things have impacted the way that I ran my company, correct, or I interacted with my customers? So what do you think about all of this?
So generally, right, so for example, I think till I started the company, right, so in large companies, legal was a black box, right? So whenever I have something, I'll go to my legal counterpart, I'll ask them, they'll give an answer. So it's mostly sorted, right? I think after we started running our own company, I think I was looking at mostly the corporate functions, right? So I think there's a lot of complexity, right? First of all, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think we have to rely on some trusted advisors, right? And we also realized beyond a point, it's not just, if you go to advisors without right base, they also cannot help you, right? If you don't put right processes, for example, if I just don't keep all my contracts in one place, and if there's a due diligence, there is no way advisor can help me, right? So I think we went through almost, including the one for the M&A, we went through 3 DDs, right? So dealt with 3 kind of legal firms doing DD on us, right? So I think there's a lot of learnings there in terms of right from initially we were not very sure about like what is the importance of these contracts, employment contracts, keeping all the vendor contracts, right? I think there are cases, for example, one particular vendor contract had one particular clause which we kind of ignored, right? For example, especially when you're going through M&A, one contract which said, if you have going through change of control, you have to inform me and you have to get my consent. Right? We would have never imagined that when we signed signed the contract, right? We just went ahead and signed the contract, right? So, but that came in the way, right? So, I think definitely it's very, very critical. I think what we realized is putting the right processes, right, and having the right kind of repositories, having right processes to review and sign whatever we're signing, right? And all of us actually is very critical, right? And that's kind of my learning, right? Just having a trusted advisor won't help if you don't put the right process in place.
Understood. No, absolutely. Also, Ajay, I'm sure you're part of these DDs, and I would not sort of like, I mean, DDs tend to be quite pressurizing, especially on the founders and founding team, correct? It tends to be, I think we've, I can speak from experience, correct? It never pans out as you planned.
Yeah.
It always goes over time,
Yeah.
over budget.
Yeah.
It'll be other issues which will come up.
Yeah.
But these are some things. In fact, when we envisaged our M&A product, there was something like this saying, we spend, let's say, on average diligence, correct? You may have, even if you're a small size company, you may have almost 1,500 documents, correct? Different things.
Employment contracts, amended contracts.
Something or the other will be there,
Yeah.
correct? Your tax filings, your
MCA filings.
MCA filings,
Yeah.
so many things are there, correct? Wouldn't it be so easy that if you dumped everything in one place, at least you'd be able to get the risks out immediately instead of having, because an average DD takes what, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
Yeah. For us,
During-
mostly
and-
for 5 weeks.
Yeah. And during that time, investor interest may also wane.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
By the end of the interest at the beginning will not be the same.
Yeah.
At the end, there will be people who will say, "Oh, I'm going to come in, I'm going to pull out." So actually, the deal making should be I've done in my career as a lawyer more than 250 deals, right? And it is, each deal is unique in its own way, correct? Yes, you need scaling, but the base is, I would say, about 95% of it is based on whatever diligence that you've taken. And that should be seamless. That should be in a matter of minutes. Should not be a couple of weeks, correct? And if you think about it from the law firm's perspective as well, correct? It's not always that you're able to get a good knowledgeable resource, correct, to be able to sort of like lead a DD. Sometimes, yes, you have a client appointment, you have a partner, you hope that the partner is hands-on, or you hope that the associates there are really hands-on. So if that doesn't happen, there can be some pluses or misses and things like this, right? This happens over the length. So I would think that, and that's how things are changing as well, correct? This is on the software side, correct? And but even then, you're moving into an area. Maybe this is something where even if you look at the enterprise space, or you look at the M&A space, or if you look at some things like these, we are also seeing a trend where hardware is becoming more relevant, correct? And it's depending on who your customers are, correct? Some customers, by the very nature, also require that their data is coming confidential. Local servers. It's a resurgence, right? It's a reverse of the cloud. And also, on AI side, correct? Unless, if you have, say, 20, 30,000 users, correct? Where the cost of, say, infrastructure is also factored in, correct? And all of these things, you have so many employees, users, so somewhere the cost is factored out. But even if you're a smaller company, say you're up to 1,000 employees, you will still, people have a tendency of saying, okay, I want to use a cloud. Cloud gets expensive, after a period of time. And there's a resurgence where people want to use local servers or use AI on local and things like that. Any thoughts around this?
It will come up more and more, I think. Most companies already realize that their data is gold, and sharing their data with any external person, even on competitors, is a huge risk.
Right.
So, local storage and then LLMs that can not be very high powered, fully functional, but they don't mind taking a little bit of a performance hit in the LLM capability in exchange for keeping things local.
Actually, you don't need the full LLM capability as well.
Yeah,
So
those things will come up. I think it's the trend of the future.
Some of these privacy issues come up, correct? But just moving on to all of these things as well. On the M&A front, correct? Just asking, so you went through an M&A where you sold the company. What was your thought process, correct? As a founder, as a founding team, saying, why did you want to sell the company? What are the things? And you already talked about how some of these things would have helped you, especially on the functional side. Just getting the DD room up and running itself becomes a huge task in itself, correct? So, but what were your thoughts?
I think M&A, so we have raised 2 rounds of funding before this, right? I think when you're looking at it, and we at the point in time, the company were mostly cash flow positive at certain scale. I think there are two options in front of us. One is going to financial investors and raise more money, continue to scale, or look for some strategic investors, right? Both options are in front of us, right? And the financial investor side, I think at that point in time in the market, I think there are not much interest. It's a delaying, and we had some interest from strategic investors. There are 2-3 options, right? So and we thought, why not? Right? And the particular case, I think we kind of entered with partnering with Skilling, where we had a common investors. And from business perspective, also what we are doing was actually completely complementary to what Skilling was doing. It is not like, for example, they already had these capabilities, right? So they're mostly into engineering education, in mechanical, civil, those areas, right? So, and we thought it made sense, right? And we had the comfort of the team, and it made sense for us, right? So I think that's why we kind of decided to go ahead with that, right? So yeah, I think the process almost it took, I would say close to 9 months.
Yeah,
right. Right. So I think
9 grueling months.
I think from the time we spoke to them first till the time kind of the money hit the bank and the transactions happened, I think almost a year. Right. I think that's something which a lot of us kind of told.
Still has to hit the bank also in some cases as well.
Yeah. I think it was an experience on its own, right? I think,
Ajay, you've been through acquisitions in the US, acquisitions locally here as well. Did you see any difference in the way things were run?
I think in the US, I was not part of the founding or anything. I was just an employee there looking from a distance. So my contribution towards those acquisitions or anything is very non-existent, really. But one thing you do notice is even from the time that potential acquisition or merger is announced till it is closed, there's a lot of things in the way you operate internally also that you'll be very careful about. You have to log everything, make sure it's giving a paper trail of anything that you want to do. Any new contracts you're entering into as part of generally running the business, which we had to do in Crio as well, purchase new business licenses in order to meet the demands of our scaling user base. So now these have to also go into the feed into the due diligence. They tell you, okay, till last month it used to be your capital or operational expenditure so much, it's going up. You have to
some standstill clauses which prevent you from
there could be. So these things, the M&A part, Rathina handled it all. I was not involved at all because the rest of the operations and other things is what I was focused on of the business itself. But yeah, you have to think. Okay, we need X more licenses. We need to buy a new tool and things like that. We have to change our terms and conditions. Because we want to introduce a new product or a new service that requires an update in our, for example, enrollment policies, placement policies, and several other things, right? So you'll be very careful about how you do this because then those lawyers are like, now this has changed. It has to go through another round of.
But this is interesting, and I want to spend a few more minutes, if that's okay with you, on this M&A itself. If you look through a typical M&A, correct, you would start off by signing a term sheet and hopefully an NDA, correct? And from a company's perspective, reviewing the term sheet itself goes through several rounds, correct? Brings with that
3 weeks.
Yeah. And you have to go through and you have advisors to tell you if this is something going to be okay to sign or not okay, or what are the additional things as well that are missing. But we've reached a stage on the technology front where all of these can be run through AI, correct? You can have legal risks on transactions immediately highlighted there. You can go through a term sheet, identify risks for yourself as a founder plus as a company. I think that's one aspect so that can be done fairly quickly because term sheet itself would take about 4 to 6 weeks, correct, of going back and forth to be able to even reach a signing stage as well. And signing is not sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's a
It was all paper for us actually. We just went to got the stamp paper and signed it.
But you think about it, you have to go and get the stamp paper, and then on top of that, you have to sort of like sign it physically, create a counterpart or counterparts depending on how many parties there are, go and sign it. That takes a couple of days.
De-signing is one. I think getting it from all the angel investors, seed investors.
Oh yeah, it's
Because
so,
I think beyond a point,
It's
whenever I ping them itself, they'll be, oh man, this guy has come back again.
someone sent me a signing contract that we signed in India other day. I was like, even to sign there are like some 20 things, right, which you have to sort of like do, which may not be applicable in place like India, saying what do I care about like a US registration or electronic signature to be able to do this. And the parties are Indian. And technically, you have to use a digital signature to be able to do all of these things. Not that an electronic signature is invalid, but at least a meeting of minds is a contract. But why would you use a DocuSign system where you had actually sort of like drag, drop, and I was explaining to you as well, correct? The longer the document, it takes 1 day to just get DocuSign up and running, correct? I mean, you should have systems or even signing, correct? And that's how we built out our systems as well, correct? In the sense that you should be able to automatically sort of like ping people, correct? Saying if you're not signed, please sign this. It should be available on your phone. It should be accessible. You should be able to sign on your phone. You don't have to necessarily.
Unfortunately, we had only 6-7 people in the cap table. I've seen friends actually who had some 20 people in the cap table. I think to just get simple things done, it's impossible to just get everyone signed. Yeah.
And I've done deals for some large companies here, and and you would have to procure stamp paper from places like Delhi, which is not always feasible.
Yeah.
And then there's always lost in translation. Sometimes there's a weekend that comes in, and you're always, if the FedEx doesn't come, the next on Monday morning you'll be like, did they really sign or not? So these are some of the things that actually come up. So in an M&A transaction, as an example. So this is just on one document, which is your term sheet. Then you actually move on to like the diligence. Diligence is like, you need a space where they keep calling for documents, more documents, all documents, even before you were born, all of those things, sometimes it would be like, I'm just, but you know how it is, right? It is like, it's not just about ticking of the boxes. There's legal, there's financial, there's compliance, there's product. Then somebody wants to one day get into your source code, your repos, all of those things. So that's another, there are a whole bunch of risks to be taken care of as well. But say from a practitioner standpoint, correct, you're giving all of them, they're evaluating this, and you expect a report that is not necessarily sort of like available to you, because you'll never have access to that till the very last say, until they decide to put all of the risks in the final documentation, correct? So I mean, it is, until then it's like it's very rare for an investor group to be able to sort of like share.
I don't think we got a report. I think we just got some of those risks added as part of our contracts, final contracts.
And the most difficult thing there also, Ajay, is unless you have someone who has the domain knowledge, like or okay, in the education space, this is what's going to happen, correct? Or in this space, now people will, for instance, I've dealt with customers or dealt with companies that did enterprise that only had enterprise customers. In financial guys would say, what's the ARR? In an enterprise setting, it is not about the ARR, it's more about the TCV, because there's so many other things that get added on, correct? The ARR is one tiny portion of license costing, but then you have support, you have training, you have so many other things that come up as well. So this is where there's a mismatch, correct? And I felt also even from the even as a founder, you need to understand what risks might come up. Right? It's always helpful. It's not always that once they give a report that you go back to your teams and say correct this. So you'll have if you had that information beforehand, it would be really helpful, and you could do some course correction if necessary during that 6-8 week period as well. Correct. And then also if you did the course correction, your valuations would always tend to go up. Correct. In the sense that you would not have to bargain on a few things as well. That's my, that's how I look at it. But today that's available. Earlier it was not available, is how I I look at things, correct? You would have to either hire your own team to do a parallel diligence, which would be an additional thing. And that is not always feasible from a money perspective, isn't it? And also the cost involved in this, correct? Sometimes when you do M&As, you not only have to pay the other lawyers' fees, correct? But you also have to foot your own lawyers' fees as well, correct? And that adds up quite a bit as well, correct? So, so that is another aspect, and that takes 8 weeks. So you've got 6 plus 8 weeks now. You're already into the 14th week, correct? And then you have documentation. People will say, I want to start documentation parallelly. What do you think, Ajay? Has that ever happened in your life? Never happened.
That is always my request, but never happened.
It never happened because investors have this thing saying, or an instruction to their lawyers usually saying, don't start until we give the go ahead, because until the deal is never done until the money hits the bank, kind of stuff, correct? And in these circumstances, especially in a DD, whether it is an acquisition or whether it is something else, it is not done until it's whatever it is. So assuming you went through signing, now you have this documentation. Isn't it one of the most stressful things ever?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you don't know a lot of stuff, right? Yeah. And then it just goes on, getting both parties and both lawyers will keep talking, right? So I think that's one of the most stressful times, I would say.
Just tell me about as a non-legal person.
I become half a lawyer. So after that period, my emails will start looking like a lawyer, right? As stated, as mentioned.
And I'm sure this is probably the time when you also got introduced to redlining. Strikeouts, all of those things, who said what, and then you had difficulties figuring out who put what where, correct? And also your email inbox is full of legal documents, correct?
Yeah, I think first of all the lawyers don't use Gmail, right? They use Outlook, right? And they don't understand the fact that the emails get into the same thread, right? And then they just keep sending the same email subject line, and then the different email dog. There are so many versions, right? You don't even know how to manage that. And most of the time, whenever I go back to them, I actually convert into Google Doc and send it to them, and they complain about it.
And secondly, there is no standardized version. And I feel sometimes that being a lawyer, correct? One of the things that which is actual pride is to maintain that sometimes you can make out a document that you drafted, because you know exactly the language that you follow. Sometimes I have there was a case once where initially, like many years back, I did the first inbound swap transaction. Okay, M&A. There was no document. I literally wrote it from scratch. Then a couple of years later, a friend of mine asked me, saying, I'm looking at, I've seen this language before. Then you realize your own language has been ripped off so many times, right? So, but, apart from like a legal pride, one of the things that really struck me was the lack of standardized documentation. Wouldn't it be so much easier where
I think the same classes, I think we just keep discussing like across multiple.
And have you been in negotiations where literally everybody is at everybody's throat and becomes like it's like an E-type personality all along?
We had three tier 1 law firms. I had one, the company who acquired us had one, and their lead investor had one.
Oh wow, okay.
Right? In fact, one firm actually representing 2 of us, the different partners.
So, right? Chinese walls
in between them.
Yeah.
It's too complicated.
And you hope that there's no conflict in the end of the whole thing. And so these are some of the things that really come out. But if you had standardized documentation, hopefully, you will be able to get through it 90% of the time.
I think I really like the way, for example, if you get the safe document of YC, right?
Yeah.
When you get a seed money of 100K, 200K, what documentation you want? Some simple doc, everyone just agrees and goes, right? But I think, in fact, when we had initial convertible note also, I had a lawyer. Right? Because we didn't, India, I think India, the safe is not
recognized. You have to bring in the money within 6 months. And all
right. So we have to get in a lawyer. I think lack of standardized documentation is definitely so much unnecessary pain.
And I have seen some angel funds call it something else. Correct? They'll say a note when it's technically not allowed or something. I've found dubious documentation. Correct? Saying you would actually be subscribing to a CCD or a CCPS. And in reality they call it like a grant or something else, which is like totally, which is totally misleading, correct? So, So lack of, I mean, even if you're doing in M&A situations, like standard documentation, standard board resolutions, standard cap table, big management becomes so difficult. Correct.
Yeah.
You should your automated documentation should have the capability to automatically maintain the cap table. Correct. Why shouldn't it? Why would you still want to use like equals bracket, open something in Excel and try and compute? I mean, that becomes these are some things which I feel, and we also implement it, correct, especially in our products, to make sure that things are sort of also like streamlined. Hopefully, and when we did actual deals, correct, also you need like a common, one of the things is, you mentioned email. You'll have hundreds of emails in the inbox, correct? And you don't know which one is the latest one, correct? So why can't you, in this age where we can do online collaborations, why can't you have an online collaboration? Call everybody on the same page, mark it up, pass whatever comments you want, have teams calls on the same.
So simple. But the thing is, I think until this guy gives a comment, the other guy will wait.
Then
you'll take 2 days to give a comment.
And then in the middle there'll be some holidays, and there's Deepavali, and there is Christmas, and therefore it goes for a toss, right? I mean, this is something which, and I've been in situations where where lawyers have changed firms in the middle of deals.
This goes on. That's for 9 months. Of course, we will change.
So I mean, life events happen, so it will be. It's one of those things, but there should be like one-touch collaboration. What is so difficult in something like this, right? To do some of these, and that kind of, and you will only tend to realize this because, I mean, the more complexity that you bring in, the more inefficiency you're trying to hide, correct, for all of these things. And I think that's one thing. If you're able to do an online collab on standardized documentation, finish it off, maybe it takes a couple of days, correct, I think, versus getting on calls where that you'll be like, you have no idea whether the deal is going to go through or not, and people are getting angry all the time and screaming and all of these things that happen, all of these things, correct? So, and after that, the documentation has to be finalized. Assuming, correct, in a document set, or what's called as a document Bible, you've got about, minimum 30, 35 documents. How would you sign this? Assuming you've got 10 parties, would you take 10 sets of 100-page printouts, burning trees, burning cartridges on printers, burning enough money on courier charges back and forth? What would you do? What's a simpler way?
No, I think that's what it happens, right? I think fortunately we had this Dunzos of the world keep sending across the city and sending couriers, right? It's definitely a logistical nightmare.
It is. And if you really looked at how deals are done, nobody's done like a carbon analysis on carbon emission analysis on deals, or legal deals being done. Correct. It would be off the scale, correct? And things like that. I mean, you mentioned sending Dunzo. I think how many times, at least Dunzo probably makes a lot of money through deals. Or even Swiggy for that. But now it's Porter, and then it's something else. But all credit to them. At least some of these things
get done. You need a carbon tax on them.
You think about it, no? But wouldn't you actually, if you were
it would have been nice if we just had a software where you can just read, someone can just look at what it is, you look at the critical parts. I think, I'm doing it for 9 months full time. Imagine, let's say, an investor who has like 1% stake in it, right? He has to still sign all of these. What is he going to review? What is the summary for him? What is it he has to worry about? Right?
But you missed the best part. People in India, if you send it to 10 parties, has the other person sign?
Who has to sign?
Has he signed? I'm not going to sign until this person has signed, isn't it?
I think we in fact had an option for some of the investors. They can do this or that. Okay, what is the other person doing? So also interesting.
So it's one of those, I think, especially if you've got a lot of angels, right? This becomes like a little difficult to manage.
Unfortunately, we had some people who we know us, right? It became much easier. Otherwise, I can imagine.
Otherwise, forever on calls,
Yeah,
correct,
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
oh, this did
yeah,
not happen, it becomes very stressful. But I'm just saying, look, we went through like how typically like you would use automation and AI for something like this, not for anything. You spent 9 months.
Yeah.
Assuming you had, say, 9 weeks, or if you could complete the whole thing in, say, a week or 2 weeks, why 9 weeks, correct?
Yeah.
Wouldn't, I would think that would be a lot more easier.
I think if it can happen in like 9 weeks, it's like significant value.
Significant value, isn't it?
I think Ajay missed the part, right? I think even though like, I was mostly running this operations, right, along with another founding member, right? But I think the critical part is like people like Ajay, who's leading the teams, have to keep the entire team motivated. And this information is not gone out, right? I think the more time it takes, it's more painful, right? And you're running a business, you're managing a cash flow, you're keeping the people together. It's very, very critical, right? So this time plays a critical role. The more it extends, it becomes even more tougher for us to keep things together.
No, absolutely. I think Ajay and in every company has one or two people like that, correct? Which, like, especially on the operations side, because as a founder, I can imagine, correct? There'll be days where you don't even want to take calls, or you don't want to do anything. You don't want to talk to anybody. You just want to be left alone, correct? So, but I think all credit to the teams that actually put things or hold things together, and isn't it? And
that's why the time, if the time can be kind of compressed, right? Even let's say 1/3 of it, there's so much value.
Correct. And also now, one of the things that especially in doing deals, whether you do it in the US or India, you'll have some obscure FEMA, especially we have foreign investors. In India, you'll have some obscure
I think
FEMA
that made it very complicated for us. Actually, the deal became very complicated just because of that.
And if you look at, the legal is one portion, and this is another thing which we also discussed previously before the podcast as well, saying, the banking and the regulations and things like that make it very, very complicated, correct? It is, and there are KYC procedures.
So you get into some structures to avoid it, or probably to probably make it less complicated. But the overall deal becomes very complicated because of that.
And it is nothing. It was not as complicated as before. But just to imagine if you're getting money from outside India, and it comes to your account, you have to you'll get a notification from a bank saying, fill up all of these things. You'll have to do a CTRS or the equivalent now. You have to do forms filings on RBI. You have to do all of these things as well, which adds from personal experience, right? In some cases, it's added like 6 or simply receiving some FDI will result in 6 or 7 months of delays because of all of the compliance issues that come in. Then the local bank has to, even before releasing monies, it will go back and check via SWIFT. We are not sure why they need to use the SWIFT, correct? SWIFT is not meant, none of the international banks actually use SWIFT. They think about it, right? In the sense that to communicate messages, right? But Indian banks do that. Is a Teams call from an authorized person going to change anything? Why does it only have to come through SWIFT? Think about some of these things, that there are some procedural inefficiencies which you have no idea, because there is no, you could have a decentralized protocol to do all of these things. If you have a central bank that does a CBDC, how difficult is it for it to implement a level 1 protocol, on blockchain to be able to sort of like exchange messages with another bank? So these are some of the things that actually come, which are external, but which you cannot control. But do you see now with AI and automation, correct, and also all of these things coming up, correct, and there's an actual need, because if you're looking at becoming like the 3rd largest or 2nd largest economy in the next 5 to 6 years, we're talking of India in this case, you are going to face all these structural issues which the economy and nobody actually planned for, correct? These are all 1970 type issues where you had to still send letters and not via, and SWIFT itself as a protocol probably is 50, 60 years old now, correct? So what do you think, Ajay? Is there...
It's inevitable. I think the people are ready. The question is, when will government and regulations and other things follow, right? It has happened in the case of, for example, UPI. It's been very convenient, government-backed initiative, making it very convenient to do money kind of transactions. Now, formalization of legal contracts and other things, first of all, will require simplification. If you have a very complicated set of regulations and rules that you can't follow, formalizing those things is bizarre. So, formalization will hopefully start or lead to simplification. They have to happen in parallel. And AI is there, it's there to make enforcement of these regulations much easier at scale, country scale. You can do country scale enforcement of regulation, which previously required manual work and other things, right? So I think all three will have to go in parallel. You have to simplify, you have to formalize, and then AI comes in as an enabler and an enforcer of all of these things.
I think one of the things also, for instance, when you talk of payments and say even cross-border payments as an example, and an aside to all of these things, if you are operating as a business in India or any individual for that matter, correct? This gets very complicated very, very soon. Imagine, you're a business where you receive, say, get paid, say 50 invoices a month. I'm just throwing a number from customers. And then what happens? There are 50 FIRCs, correct? Foreign inward remittance certificates for every remittance that your bank account received. But before the FIRC is issued,
but you can't have a foreign account and get it and transfer it once.
You can potentially, but still,
you need a foreign entity for that.
You need a foreign entity for that. And the legal way of doing things, at least, is to make sure, at least in India, that you have a subsidiary of a company, and you need to have a track record for that ODI scheme, and so it gets complicated very, very, very fast, right? Or you can just choose to ignore, but then face at some point the income tax department knocking on your door, correct? So these are two options that are available. But imagine, even on the you have a system now which is if you have AI for that matter, you think about it. There's a pattern recognition system which basically says that yes. Now what happens manually? You receive remittance in your bank account, as an example. Now the banker will send you one saying, please categorize the transaction. Only then I'm going to sort of like release this. Now you can have AI sort of like look into all of these things and do this. But the banker still, for instance, I've not reached this. They need some proof saying that, oh, you have said that this is a legitimate remittance. And I mean, if I'm using a bank for all of this, it's great. But there are other means where you can do all of these. Like, I won't get into the details, but but you can do all of these things. You can automate so many of these things as well, correct? And you can lot of opportunities in all of these things. You are founders who sort of like spend time in actually training and all of these things. Do some of these things interest you? Because there's a lot of opportunity as well to sort of overcome some of these things. Some structural changes as the economy takes shape and things like that. What do you guys think?
I think definitely there's a lot of opportunity, right? I think in the overall, I think this is like we have got some raw digitization done, right? And you've not really optimized a lot of those processes, right? And I think definitely there's a lot of opportunity across. Not just in banking, right? Overall, across the services.
As an example, but why banking comes up is any scale business, the first hurdles that you start hitting is the bank, isn't it? Is this something? I mean, regardless of, we as founders, the first hurdle you can talk to any founder. This will be the first hurdle that is not correct. So, I think that's.
But even just having a corporate credit card with them, and then managing that is a pain.
Oh yeah, totally. You'll have to hit certain turnover levels to be even accessing the corporate credit card. But it's still tied to your Aadhaar number, your personal guarantee. So I'm like, there's no point in having a corporate credit card because that is once again tied to something else, isn't it? So I think, small things like bill discounting and make it a big thing. Very recently, even government schemes, correct? One of our banks told us that, as an MSME, you can get lines of credit, uncollateralized lines of credit which never happens in India, but that's apparently the government guarantees all of these things as well. You go and ask the bank for all this. They say you must not have any loan anywhere else. Correct? Like show me any credit report of any person in India who has no loan somewhere, whatever it is, right? So the banks themselves laugh, but at the end of the day, I think this is one of the significant places where some of these things can change as well. But we've gone through all of these things, but in your next, I wish you the very best in your journey as well on the next things that you're planning. Very exciting stuff, correct? And hopefully some of these things that we discussed today also make it to reality in some of your lives. All of these things as well.
Certainly hope so. I think if you just lower the bar and make it easier for people to start businesses, many people just get spooked by how complicated even the initial setup of the business, the contracts and receiving money. You go to investors with an idea. First question, if they like your idea and they want to give you money, first question they'll ask you, are you incorporated? Where are you incorporated?
Outside India.
A lot of questions like that. And then, of course, they prefer outside India because they have their system set up there. But now you see many large companies coming back to India, like rehoming in some sense, like Crio is coming back, paid a huge amount to move their headquarters, the taxes, right? Because it's more meaningful to go IPO in the Indian market rather than the US market because of the market cap that they have. So these things will come. I mean, if you just make it easy for people to be compliant, start something, be compliant and run a healthy, the hygiene part of the business that is taken care of, I think it will encourage a lot more people.
I totally agree. I think
take that jump.
There's a lot. I think that portion, it gets complicated really fast. Correct. Very, very early in the life of the company as well. Correct. So I think spot on some of these things as well about how some of these things can be streamlined. And also I think there is especially on sort of like opening outside India. There are. I mean, from a legal and also as a founder's perspective, many founders don't realize how complicated things can get for them. And it's not just from a tax perspective, but from a compliance and a reporting perspective. And what happens one day if you cannot travel to that country, correct? Then what happens? What will you do with all of these things? And also, you also lose some home market advantages, which is always, maybe you have at least you have for e-procurement, things are moving towards that. There are some advantages as an economy grows as well, but I think it's not. But I see a lot of these things as well. If you see my Instagram feed and it's profiled you as a founder, normally there's open in Dubai, open in America, open here, open there, correct? This is exactly how it is going to be, correct? I would think that there's a lot more nuances than just deciding to sort of like set up shop there. And probably the decision, I don't know, Rathinamurthy, would you wait for a company to grow to a certain stage before you obviously take the decision to sort of internationalize the company, or would you do it on day one?
No, I think for us, the market was India, so it was a straightforward decision for us. I think the founders who are actually having their primary market outside India, I think my understanding is, I think the decision has to be taken a lot in the beginning itself, right? Because it makes a difference. Let's say if you're going to get customers right from day one from, let's say, in the US, it makes sense for you to have a company incorporated in the US, right? But I think for us it was straightforward because our primary business was in India.
So, an aside and a joke on that, I asked someone very senior in NASCOM very early on saying, so what should we do? Should we look at this or a foreign structure? What are your thoughts on this? He said, please stick to home ground. If you go to the US, correct, you will have your neighbor and everyone else competing against you on the same product as well. So I think he was like, first achieve some PMF, before you even bother all of these things. But well-meaning, even NASCOM things like this. Just saying. But thanks so much on this,
Thank you.
and all of and pleasure having you guys on board. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Yes.